My daughter deleted my name from the guest list, and the reason destroyed my heart. I never imagined I would receive that phone call. After 53 years living in this world, after having gone through so many joys and sorrows, after having built a family that I believed was solid as rock, I simply wasn't prepared to hear those words coming out of my own daughter's mouth. It was an ordinary Tuesday, one of those days when you wake up thinking it will be just another day in the routine, another breakfast alone since my husband passed away 3 years ago, another morning walk through the park, another afternoon watering the garden plants that he loved so much. I was right there, with the hose in my hand, watering the rose bushes that had bloomed beautifully that spring, when my cell phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. Amanda, my only daughter, my most precious treasure. The girl I carried in my womb for 9 months and who completely transformed my life the moment she was born. I answered with that automatic smile that appears on every mother's face when her daughter calls, imagining it would be a quick conversation about the wedding that had been planned for months. Perhaps she wanted my opinion on the flowers or the dinner menu. But no. Her voice was different. It had a coldness I had never heard before, a distance that immediately put me on alert. She said my name. She didn't call me mother as she always did. She just said Clara as if she were talking to any acquaintance. And then she dropped the bomb that would explode my life into 1,000 pieces. She said she needed to tell me something important, that she had made a difficult but necessary decision, and that she hoped I would understand. My heart was already racing. That maternal intuition that never fails was screaming that something very bad was coming. And then she said it. She said she had removed my name from the guest list for her wedding. She said I was no longer invited to the ceremony. She said it would be better this way, that it was what she really wanted, that it was what she needed to do to be able to be happy on the most important day of her life. I simply froze. The words didn't make sense in my head. It was as if she were speaking another language, as if each syllable were a code I couldn't decipher. My weak hand dropped the hose which fell on the lawn, soaking my feet, but I didn't even feel the cold water wetting my shoes. Everything around me seemed to disappear. The birds singing, the hot afternoon sun, the scent of roses. Nothing else existed except that cold voice on the other end of the line telling me I wasn't welcome at my own daughter's wedding. I tried to speak. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat was completely closed, as if an invisible hand were strangling me. Tears began to roll down my face without me even noticing, wetting my blouse while I desperately tried to process what was happening. I finally managed to stammer a "why," just that, a hoarse and broken word that carried all the desperation and all the confusion that were taking over me at that moment. And that's when she told me. That's when the reason came out of her mouth and completely destroyed my heart, turning to dust all the years of love and dedication I had invested in that relationship. Amanda told me that the reason I couldn't go to her wedding was because her future mother-in-law, Beatrice, had demanded it. She said Beatrice had issued an ultimatum, either me or her, and that Amanda had chosen to keep her mother-in-law happy because after all, she would be part of the family forever and she couldn't start the marriage creating problems with the groom's mother. My mind was spinning, trying to understand how this was possible, trying to understand how my daughter could discard me so easily because of a woman she had known for only 2 years. I asked her what I had done, what problem Beatrice had with me, why she didn't want me there. Amanda hesitated. I could hear her breathing deeply on the other end of the line, as if she were gathering courage to continue. And then she told me everything. She told me that Beatrice had discovered something about me, something from my past that I had hidden for so many years, a secret that I had kept locked in the deepest part of my soul, because I was ashamed, because I was afraid of judgment, because I believed that some things were better left in the past where they belonged. But the past never really stays buried, does it? It always finds a way to come back to the surface, to explode in your face precisely when you least expect it, when you finally started to believe you were safe. The secret that Beatrice had discovered was about my youth, about something that happened when I was only 18 years old and that completely changed the course of my life. When I was young, Long before meeting Amanda's father, long before becoming the respectable and well-established woman I was for decades, I went through a very difficult phase. My family was poor, my father had died leaving my mother alone with 4 children to raise, and there wasn't money even for food properly, let alone for the dreams I had of studying and going to college. I worked during the day in a clothing store earning a pittance, and at night I did some extra sewing work trying to save every penny I could get. But it wasn't enough, it was never enough, and I saw my mother killing herself working. I saw my younger siblings going without, and I felt completely powerless. That's when I met a woman named Sonia who worked in a place, how can I say, a place that wasn't exactly respectable. It was a nightclub, one of those that operate until dawn, where rich men went to drink and have fun with beautiful women. Sonia offered me work there, said I was pretty enough to make a lot of money, said I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to, that I could just work as a waitress, serving drinks and talking with clients. I knew it was wrong. I knew my mother would be devastated if she found out. But desperation does terrible things to people. I needed that money. I needed to help my family, and so I accepted. I worked at that club for almost a year. At first it really was just serving drinks, smiling at the men, letting them flirt a little while they filled my tray with generous tips. The money was good, much better than anything I could earn in an honest job, and I could send almost all of it to my mother, who never asked where it came from. But over time, things started to change. The clients started asking for more, offering increasingly larger amounts for private company, and the pressure from the club owner increased every time I refused. There were other girls there who did more than just serve drinks, girls who went out with clients and came back with bags full of money, and Sonia kept telling me I was wasting my potential, that I could be earning double or triple if I were just a little more flexible. I resisted for months, but then my mother got sick, needed an expensive surgery that the public health system didn't cover, and I simply didn't have anywhere to get that money from. That's when I gave in. That's when I crossed that line I swore I would never cross. I won't go into details because it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that for a few months I did things I'm not proud of, things that allow me to look in the mirror to this day, all for money, all because I was desperate and saw no other way out. Eventually, I managed to get out of that life. My mother recovered, my siblings grew up a bit and were able to start working too, and I simply stopped going to the club one day and never went back. I moved to another city shortly after, started a new life, finally managed to go to the college I always dreamed of through a lot of hard work and some scholarships, and I met Roberto, the man who would become my husband and Amanda's father. I never told him about that period of my life. I simply locked those memories in a box deep in my mind and threw away the key. I built a completely different life, became a respected teacher, a dedicated wife, a loving mother. That desperate girl who worked in a nightclub seemed like another person, someone who had nothing to do with the woman I had become. Or at least, that's what I believed. But Beatrice had discovered everything. Somehow, investigating my past as these controlling mothers-in-law love to do, she had dug deep enough to find records from that time, had talked to the right or wrong people depending on the point of view, and had put together the whole story. And then she had used it as a weapon, had gone to Amanda and told her everything, painting the most horrible picture possible of the mother her daughter thought she knew. When Amanda confronted me with this information on that phone call, I didn't know what to say. How do you explain something like that? How do you make your daughter understand that wasn't really you, that it was desperate circumstances in a desperate time, that you did what you thought you needed to do to survive and help the people you loved? I tried to explain. With a broken voice and words coming out all jumbled, I tried to make her understand the context, the impossible situation I was in, the desperation that led me to make those decisions. But she didn't want to listen. I could feel in her voice that she had already made her decision, that she had already judged and condemned me, that nothing I said would change her opinion. She said she was disappointed, that she never imagined I could have hidden something like this from her whole life, that she felt betrayed for not really knowing who her mother was. She said Beatrice was right to be concerned, that this kind of past wasn't something that could simply be ignored, that it reflected on a person's character. Every word that came out of her mouth was like a stab in my chest, and I simply couldn't believe it was my own daughter saying those things. I asked her if all the years I spent raising her meant nothing, if all the nights I stayed awake when she was sick, all the school games I attended, all the tears I dried, all the dreams I helped build, if none of that counted for anything. I asked if she really believed that that dark period of my youth defined who I was as a person, as a mother. She was silent for a long moment, and for a second I thought I had reached her, that she was reflecting and reconsidering. But then she said she understood I had done what I thought necessary at that time, but that it didn't change the fact that Beatrice wouldn't feel comfortable with my presence at the wedding knowing this story, and that she had to respect her mother-in-law's feelings, because after all she was the mother of the man she loved and with whom she was going to spend the rest of her life. She said she hoped I would understand, that I wouldn't make things more difficult than they already were, that maybe with time we could rebuild our relationship, but that for now she needed me to respect her decision and not show up at the wedding. I hung up the phone without saying anything else. I simply pressed the red button and stood there in the middle of the garden with water from the hose still gushing on the lawn at my feet, the rose bushes swaying gently in the afternoon breeze, the world continuing to spin as if nothing had happened while mine had just completely collapsed. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually my legs gave out and I simply let myself fall on the wet ground, sitting on the grass with my back against the flower bed, and I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since Roberto's funeral. I cried until I had no more tears, until my throat was raw and my eyes so swollen I could barely open them. I cried for the desperate girl I was, for the impossible choices I had to make, for the mistakes I made. I cried for the mother I always tried to be, for the woman I worked so hard to become. And I cried especially for the daughter who had just rejected me in the most painful way possible, who chose to please a stranger instead of defending the woman who raised her. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. I could barely get out of bed, had no appetite, had no desire to do anything. The garden I loved so much was abandoned. The plants began to wither without care, but I couldn't muster the energy to care. Friends called and I didn't answer. Messages accumulated on my phone without response. I simply couldn't function, couldn't pretend I was okay when my world had been destroyed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, reliving that phone call infinitely in my mind, thinking about all the things I could have said differently, all the ways I could have explained better. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Amanda had made her choice. She had chosen the judgment of a woman she barely knew over the unconditional love of the mother who had always been by her side. I began to question everything. Was I a bad mother? Had I failed to transmit the right values to her? Did my past really make me a person unworthy of being present at the most important moment of my daughter's life? I dove into a spiral of self-criticism and self-destruction, going over every memory, every moment of raising her, looking for where I had gone wrong, where I had failed so miserably that she could discard me so easily. And the more I thought, the more I realized something that left me even more devastated. Amanda had always been a girl very concerned with appearances, with what others thought. Since she was little, she cared a lot about status, about being accepted by the right groups, about maintaining an impeccable image. I always thought it was just a phase, that with time she would mature and realize these things weren't really important. But I realized maybe I was wrong. Maybe she had become a woman who valued external approval more than genuine family ties. Her fiancé, Gabriel, came from a very wealthy and influential family in the city. Beatrice was one of those matriarchs who commanded everything and everyone around her with an iron fist, a woman accustomed to having her wishes fulfilled without question. And Amanda was so dazzled by the possibility of becoming part of that family, of having access to that world of luxury and privilege, that she was willing to sacrifice anything, including her own mother. It was a painful realization to realize I had raised a daughter capable of such coldness and calculation. Where had I gone wrong? At what moment had she learned that relationships could be disposable, That people could be used and then thrown away when they were no longer convenient? 2 weeks had passed since that phone call when I received an unexpected visit. It was Mariana, my best friend for over 20 years, one of the few people who knew the truth about my past because I had confided in her years ago in a moment of weakness and need for confession. She had called several times and I hadn't answered, so she simply showed up at my door, determined not to leave without talking to me. She found me in a deplorable state, in pajamas in the middle of the afternoon, disheveled hair, red and swollen eyes, the house a complete mess around me. She said nothing, just hugged me tight and let me cry on her shoulder for long minutes. Then she dragged me to the bathroom, put me under the shower, and while I was bathing, she began to tidy up the house and prepare food. It was only afterward, when we were sitting at the table with bowls of steaming soup in front of us, that she finally spoke. And what she said changed everything. Mariana told me she had talked to some people, that she had investigated a bit on her own, and that she had discovered things about Beatrice I needed to know. Apparently, I wasn't the only person whose past Amanda's mother-in-law had investigated. Beatrice had the habit of hiring private investigators to dig through the lives of anyone who approached her family, looking for any kind of dirt or secret she could use as leverage. She had done this with Gabriel's previous girlfriends, with her husband's business partners, with practically any new person who entered her social circle. It was a form of control, a way to ensure she always had power over everyone around her. And it had worked with Amanda because my daughter was so desperate to be accepted by that family that she had become completely manipulable. But there was more. Mariana discovered that Beatrice herself had considerable skeletons in her closet. Her husband, Gabriel's father, had been investigated years ago for tax fraud and had only escaped prison because he had enough money to hire the best lawyers. Gabriel's older brother had gone through rehabilitation for drug problems not once but 3 times. And Beatrice herself had had an extramarital affair that almost destroyed her marriage about a decade ago. But all of this had been carefully swept under the rug, hidden from society through money and influence, while she allowed herself to judge and condemn the mistakes of others as if she were morally superior. This revelation ignited something inside me. It wasn't exactly anger, although there was anger too, but it was more a kind of clarity, a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. If Beatrice could dig up my past and use it as a weapon against me, if she could manipulate my daughter against her own mother, then 2 could play that game. Not that I really wanted to play. I didn't want to sink to her level, but I needed Amanda to know the truth about the family she was entering. I needed her to open her eyes to the type of person her future mother-in-law was. Mariana warned me to be careful, said that people like Beatrice could be dangerous when threatened, but I didn't care anymore. I had already lost my daughter, at least that's what it seemed, so what more did I have to lose? I spent the following days planning carefully. I didn't want to simply call Amanda and dump information about Beatrice. That would seem like petty revenge, and she probably wouldn't even believe me. I needed a more subtle, more effective approach. That's when I had an idea. The wedding was scheduled to take place in 3 weeks. Even without being officially invited, I knew all the details because I had helped Amanda with the planning for months before being excluded. I knew where it would be. I knew the time. I knew practically the entire schedule. And I knew there would be a moment during the reception where the groom's father would give a speech, traditionally followed by the bride's mother. Except that since I had been removed from the guest list, that tradition would be skipped. But what if I showed up anyway? What if I simply arrived at the reception, not at the ceremony because I didn't want to ruin that moment for Amanda, but at the reception where everyone would already be celebrating and it would be harder to expel me without causing a huge scene? The idea was risky and probably wouldn't work, but I needed to try. I needed at least the chance to look into my daughter's eyes one last time, to say the words I had rehearsed 1,000 times in my head since that terrible phone call. And if by chance there was an opportunity to expose Beatrice for the type of person she really was, then so much the better. I began to prepare. I went back to taking care of myself. started eating properly again, cleaned the house, went back to watering the garden. I needed to be strong for what was coming. I bought a new dress, discreet but elegant, the kind of outfit a mother would wear to her daughter's wedding. I went to the salon to do my hair and nails. I rehearsed what I would say, carefully choosing each word to cause maximum impact. The wedding day arrived, and I was strangely calm. I had a clarity of purpose that sustained me, a certainty that I was doing the right thing, even if it went completely wrong. I put on my new dress, fixed my hair, applied light but careful makeup to hide the traces of weeks of crying. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment I saw again the woman I used to be before all this happened, strong and confident and full of love for my daughter. I took my purse, where I had stored an envelope with copies of documents that Mariana had obtained about Beatrice and her family, evidence that proved everything she had told me. I didn't know if I would use them, but I wanted to have them as an option if necessary. I drove to the reception venue, an elegant country club on the outskirts of the city, and parked in a discreet corner of the parking lot. I waited. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon, and the reception would begin around 6. I planned to arrive at 7, when everyone would already be dining and drinking, when spirits would be more relaxed, and maybe I could blend into the crowd long enough to get to Amanda. While waiting in the car, my mind wandered back to when Amanda was little. I remembered when she was born, that magical moment when they placed her in my arms for the first time, and she opened those huge little eyes and looked at me as if she recognized me, as if she knew I was her mother and would always take care of her. I remembered her first day of school, how she grabbed my hand tightly and begged me not to leave, and how my heart broke, having to leave her there, crying. I remembered all the birthday parties I organized, all the cakes I made by hand, all the nights I read bedtime stories, all the conversations about boys and friends and dreams and fears. I remembered when she entered adolescence and we started having those typical mother-daughter conflicts, but we always managed to reconcile because at the end of the day, we loved each other, and that's what mattered. I remembered when she met Gabriel and came to tell me all excited that she had found the man of her life, and how happy I was for her even though I had some reservations about him that I never expressed because I wanted her to be happy above all. And I remembered all the months planning this wedding together, choosing flowers and colors and music, dreaming about what her perfect day would be like. How had it come to this point? How had that little girl who loved me more than anything in the world become capable of excluding me from the most important moment of her life? The answer was complicated, I knew. It wasn't just about my past or about Beatrice's manipulation. It was about all the small choices and influences that had shaped Amanda over the years, about the values she had developed or not developed, about the type of person she had chosen to become. And maybe, painful as it was to admit, part of the blame was mine. Maybe I had been too permissive when she was young. Maybe I hadn't been firm enough in teaching that character matters more than status, that family matters more than appearances. Or maybe I had nothing to do with it. Maybe some people were just like that, and there was nothing we could do. I had no answers. I only had pain and confusion and a desperate need to make my daughter hear me, really hear me, at least once. I looked at the clock. 7 o'clock. It was time. I got out of the car, smoothing my dress and taking a deep breath to calm myself. I started walking toward the club, my heart beating faster with each step. I could hear music in the distance, laughter and animated conversations coming from the party hall. I entered the building, passing by the reception where an employee looked at me questioningly, but didn't stop me, perhaps assuming I was just another guest arriving a little late. I followed the sound of the party, walking through elegantly decorated hallways until I reached the double doors that led to the main hall. I stopped there for a moment, gathering courage, and then I pushed the doors and entered. The hall was beautiful, exactly as Amanda had imagined. White and pink flowers everywhere, soft lights creating a romantic atmosphere, elegantly arranged tables where guests dined and chatted cheerfully. A band played soft music in a corner. And there in front, at the main table, was Amanda in her stunning wedding dress, next to Gabriel, both smiling and talking with the people around them. She was radiant, more beautiful than I had ever seen her, and my heart filled with love and pain at the same time. Next to her was Beatrice, wearing a chic navy blue dress, her face showing that expression of superior satisfaction of someone who had gotten everything they wanted. I started walking through the hall, trying to remain discreet, but soon I realized that people were recognizing me and beginning to whisper. Heads turned, conversations were interrupted, and a wave of murmurs began to spread through the hall. That's when Amanda saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded hall, and I saw her face go through a series of emotions in rapid succession: surprise, shock, anger, and something that seemed for a brief moment to be conflict or perhaps even remorse. She stood up from the table abruptly, making her chair scrape, and began walking toward me with quick and determined steps. Beatrice also saw me and immediately stood up, following Amanda with an expression of barely disguised fury. Other guests began to notice that something was happening, and the hall became progressively quieter as everyone turned to observe the scene that was unfolding. Even the band stopped playing when they realized no one was paying attention to the music anymore. When Amanda got close to me, she stopped a few meters away, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, her face a mask of controlled anger. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she said through gritted teeth, her voice low but loaded with tension. "I clearly said you weren't welcome." I looked at her, at this woman who had been my little girl, and I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes, but I forced myself to keep them under control. "I came because I'm your mother," I said simply, my voice firmer than I expected. "Because I love you more than anything in this world, and I couldn't let this day pass without at least trying to make you understand that. Without at least trying to make you see that you're making a terrible mistake." She started to respond, but Beatrice arrived beside her at that moment, placing a possessive hand on my daughter's shoulder and staring at me with absolute contempt. "You shouldn't be here," Beatrice said in that cold and authoritative voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're causing a scene and ruining the bride's day. I suggest you leave immediately before I call security." I looked at her, at this woman who had destroyed my relationship with my daughter, who had used my past as a weapon against me while hiding her own secrets and imperfections. And something inside me exploded. "You have no authority to tell me what to do," I said, my voice coming out louder than I intended, echoing through the now completely silent hall. "Not when you yourself are a fraud, a hypocrite who judges the mistakes of others while hiding your own. You want to talk about my past, Beatrice, so let's also talk about yours. Let's talk about how your husband almost went to prison for fraud, about how your son had to be admitted 3 times for drug addiction, about how you had an affair that almost destroyed your marriage. You're no better than anyone else, so what right do you have to judge me? What right do you have to push me away from my own daughter?" Beatrice's expression changed drastically, the color draining from her face as she looked around at all the guests who were hearing every word. Amanda was looking at me with wide eyes, clearly shocked not only by what I had said, but by the fact that I had come prepared with information about the groom's family. "That's not true," Beatrice said, but her voice was trembling, her previous confidence completely shaken. "You're making up absurd stories to get revenge on me." "I'm not making up anything," I said, opening my purse and taking out the envelope with the documents. "I have proof of everything I said, copies of public records, newspaper reports, testimonies. Do you want to see them? Or do you prefer to keep pretending you're perfect while destroying other people's families?" The silence in the hall was absolute now, everyone completely mesmerized by the drama unfolding. Gabriel had stood up and come to where we were, his face showing confusion and growing concern. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked, looking at Beatrice. "What is she talking about?" Beatrice opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She clearly hadn't expected to be confronted like this, hadn't prepared any defense because she was accustomed to always being the one who controlled the narrative. I saw my chance and took it. I turned to Amanda, completely ignoring Beatrice now. "Amanda," I said, my voice softening, all the anger draining and being replaced only by love and sadness. I never wanted you to find out about my past that way. Never wanted it to be used as a weapon against our relationship. Yes, I did things I'm not proud of when I was young. I made desperate decisions in desperate times. But everything I did out of love for my family, to help the people I loved. And then I spent the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to be the best mother I could be to you. I dedicated every moment of my life to loving you, supporting you, helping you become the woman you are today. And doesn't that mean anything to you? Are you really going to discard me? Are you going to allow this woman who barely knows you to destroy our relationship just because she discovered some secrets from my past? Think about what that says about you, Amanda. Think about the kind of person you're becoming. I saw tears begin to roll down Amanda's face, her rigid expression beginning to break down. She began, her voice breaking. I don't know what to think. Everything was so clear in my head. But now I don't know anything anymore. Beatrice tried to put her hand on her shoulder again, but Amanda pulled away, looking at her mother-in-law with a new expression, as if she were really seeing her for the first time. You knew about these things about your own family, she asked Beatrice. You knew, and yet you judged me for having a mother with a complicated past? How can you be so hypocritical? Beatrice tried to recover, tried to regain control of the situation. Dear, this is completely different, she said in that condescending tone. These are situations that were resolved a long time ago and don't reflect on who we are as a family. What your mother did, well, that kind of behavior is simply unacceptable and isn't the type of person we want associated with our family. And it was at that moment that something broke in Amanda. I could see it happening, as if a fog lifted from her eyes, and she finally saw with clarity what had been right in front of her all this time. She turned to Beatrice with an expression that mixed anger and disappointment. Not the type of person you want associated with the family, she repeated slowly. You mean you, don't you, Beatrice? Because you're the one who decided my mother wasn't good enough, who manipulated me into accepting your version of the facts, who made me choose between her and you. And I was so stupid, so dazzled by the idea of being part of your perfect family that I didn't even question it, didn't think twice before discarding the woman who gave me life and loved me unconditionally all these years. She turned to me, and I saw in her eyes something I hadn't seen in weeks. I saw love and remorse and pain. Mom, I'm so sorry, she said, the words coming out in sobs as tears flowed freely down her face. I was so wrong, so unfair to you. I was cruel and insensitive, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you anyway. How could I have been so blind? I took a step forward and pulled her into my arms, hugging her tight while she cried on my shoulder like she did when she was a child and the world seemed too big and scary. It's okay, I whispered in her ear, my own voice choked with emotion. It's okay, my love, I'm here. I always have been, and always will be. We stayed like that for long moments while the entire hall watched in silence, some guests visibly moved by the scene, others still processing everything that had been revealed. Finally, Amanda pulled back a little, wiping the tears from her face and leaving mascara marks on her cheeks. She looked around at all the guests, at the elegant tables and perfect decorations, and the party that had been so carefully planned. And then she did something I never expected, something so brave and impactful that it changed everything. She turned to Gabriel, who was standing there looking completely lost about what to do or say. Gabriel, she said, her voice firm despite the tears. I love you, you know that. But I can't start our life together like this. I can't build our family on the foundation of having rejected my own mother to please yours. I can't marry you today knowing I allowed your mother to manipulate and control the situation, that I allowed her to make me choose between you and the woman who raised me. This isn't right. None of this is right. Gabriel took a step forward, taking her hands, his face showing panic. "Amanda, no, please, let's talk about this. Let's find a solution. It doesn't have to be like this." But she shook her head, gently pulling away from him. "It does," she said softly. "Because if we start our marriage like this, establishing that it's acceptable for your mother to interfere in our life to the point of making me discard my own family, then what kind of marriage will we have? What kind of life will we build?" The party was officially over. Guests began whispering among themselves, some getting up from their tables not knowing whether they should stay or leave. Beatrice was paralyzed, completely undone by the turn of events, the face that always showed so much confidence and control now showing only shock and helplessness. Gabriel tried a few more times to convince Amanda to change her mind, but she was firm in her decision. It wasn't that she didn't love him, she explained. It was that she needed time to process everything, to think about what she really wanted from a marriage and a family, to understand how they had reached this point and how they could move forward in a healthy way, if that was even possible. She said that maybe later, after they had serious conversations about boundaries and about the role parents would have in their married life, they could reconsider. But not today, not like this. We left the club together, Amanda still in her wedding dress, me in my party dress, both crying and laughing at the same time, both processing everything that had happened on that absolutely surreal day. We went to my house, that house where she had grown up, where all the happy memories of her childhood still lived in the walls and corners. We sat in the garden, that same garden where I had received the phone call that changed everything, and talked for hours. We talked about my past with more detail and honesty than I had managed during that terrible phone call. She asked me questions, and I answered them all, without hiding, without trying to embellish or justify excessively. I just told the truth, the whole truth, and let her draw her own conclusions. And you know what she said? She said that although it hurt to know I had hidden that from her for so many years, she understood why. She understood the desperation that led me to make those decisions, understood the shame that made me keep it secret, understood that it didn't define who I was as a person or as a mother. We also talked about her, about the pressures she felt to fit into a certain type of life, about how she had let herself be dazzled by the wealth and status of Gabriel's family, to the point of losing sight of what really mattered. She admitted she had been arrogant and judgmental, that she had become exactly the type of person she herself wouldn't want to meet. She said the shock of realizing this there in front of all the guests had been devastating but necessary, a brutal awakening she needed. And she apologized, not just once but several times, for the months of pain she had caused me, for the cruelty of having excluded me from the wedding, for having chosen the approval of strangers over a mother's unconditional love. I forgave her, of course I forgave her, because that's what mothers do. But I also made it clear that she had a lot of work to do on herself, many issues to resolve about her values and priorities, a lot of growth ahead if she wanted to become the woman I knew she could be. As for Gabriel and Beatrice, well, things got complicated as you can imagine. Gabriel called the next day, desperate to talk to Amanda, to try to save the relationship. She agreed to meet with him, but only if he was alone, without the presence or interference of his mother. They had several long and difficult conversations in the weeks that followed. Gabriel insisted he loved Amanda and wanted a future with her, but Amanda made it clear that this would only be possible if he established firm boundaries with Beatrice. She said she couldn't be in a relationship where the mother-in-law would have so much power and control, where important decisions would be influenced or even dictated by someone outside the couple. And to his credit, Gabriel eventually agreed and actually talked to his mother, establishing boundaries that probably should have been established a long time ago. It was difficult and painful for everyone involved, but it was necessary. Beatrice, for her part, never really apologized or admitted she had done anything wrong. Women like her rarely do. But she lost a lot that day. She lost the absolute control she had over her son's life. She lost the impeccable reputation she had cultivated so carefully when her own secrets were publicly exposed. The story of the canceled wedding and the dramatic revelations spread through the city society like wildfire, and Beatrice found herself subject to the same kind of judgment and gossip she so enjoyed inflicting on others. It was a form of poetic justice, I suppose, although I felt no particular satisfaction in seeing her downfall. I was too busy rebuilding my relationship with my daughter to spend energy thinking about Beatrice. Amanda and Gabriel ended up getting married 6 months later, in a small and intimate ceremony very different from the extravagance that had been originally planned. It was just close family and true friends, not hundreds of guests who were there only out of social obligation. And this time, I was there. Not only was I there, but I had a central role in the ceremony, walking with my daughter to the altar since her father was no longer with us to do so, holding her hand and feeling my heart fill with love and gratitude that we had found our way back to each other. It was one of the happiest days of my life, much more meaningful than that grand party would have been, because it represented not only the union of Amanda and Gabriel, but also the healing and strengthening of the bond between mother and daughter. Looking back now, months after all this happened, it still hurts to think about how close we came to losing each other forever. It hurts to remember that terrible phone call, those weeks of despair and depression, that feeling of having been completely rejected by the person I loved most in the world. But I'm also grateful for what happened in a strange way, because it forced us to confront issues we might never have addressed otherwise. It forced Amanda to examine her values and priorities, to realize she had lost herself a bit in the pursuit of acceptance and status. It forced me to finally be honest about my past, to stop carrying that shame and secret alone. And it forced both of us to recognize that our relationship, as strong as it was, still needed work and constant communication. I learned that maternal love, as deep and unconditional as it may be, isn't always enough by itself. We also need mutual understanding, honesty, respect for each other's choices, even when we don't agree. I learned that we all carry some kind of past, we all have things we're not proud of, and that the measure of our character isn't in having a perfect history, but in how we deal with our mistakes and how we treat others despite their imperfections. And I learned that it's never too late to rebuild burned bridges, to apologize when we're wrong, to forgive when we've been hurt. Amanda learned these lessons too, perhaps in the hardest way possible, but she learned. And we're both stronger and closer because of it. Today our relationship is different from what it was before, more honest and authentic in a way. There are no more secrets between us. There's no more that need to keep up appearances or pretend we're perfect. We can talk about anything, including the difficult topics we avoided before. And she has become more careful about who she allows to influence her life and decisions, more aware of the boundaries she needs to establish to protect her most important relationships. As for me, I finally made peace with my past. It's no longer this dark secret I carry with shame, but just a part of my history, a series of difficult choices I made in difficult circumstances that helped me become who I am today. I shared my story with some close people, not because I wanted attention or sympathy, but because I realized that hiding who we are never ends well, that vulnerability and authenticity are more important than the perfect image. So yes, my daughter erased my name from her wedding guest list, and the reason destroyed my heart at the time. But in the end, what seemed like a tragedy ended up being a catalyst for necessary transformations, both for her and for me. Sometimes we need things to completely fall apart before they can be rebuilt the right way, stronger and truer than they were before. And although I would never want to go through that pain again, I wouldn't change the final outcome. I have my daughter back, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, and our relationship is deeper and more meaningful than it ever was. That's all a mother can ask for. If you're going through something similar, if you feel you've lost someone important because of judgment, manipulation, or misunderstandings, I want you to know there is hope. Not every story has a happy ending like mine did, but it's worth fighting for the relationships that matter. It's worth being vulnerable, being honest, confronting the difficult problems instead of sweeping them under the rug. And it's worth establishing boundaries with toxic people who try to control or manipulate you or your loved ones. It's not easy. God knows it's not, but nothing worthwhile in life is easy. And true relationships, those built on foundations of genuine love and mutual understanding, can survive even the most brutal storms if both parties are willing to do the work. I would love to hear your stories too. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever felt you lost someone important because of judgment or external interference? How did you deal with it? Leave a comment below sharing your experience. And if this story touched you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more real stories about family relationships, about overcoming, and about the power of forgiveness. Your interactions help more people find these stories and perhaps find comfort or inspiration in their own difficult situations. Thank you for reading this far. Thank you for being part of this community. And always remember that true love, especially the love between mothers and children, can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable if we give it the chance to flourish again.